August 17th, 1944. Northern France. The air smelled of cordite and diesel, a scent every German mechanic knew by now. But this time, it wasn't from one of their own vehicles. Parked awkwardly on the roadside, shrapnel holes glittering along its canvas top, sat a captured American truck, a GMC CCKW, what the Americans casually called a deuce and a half. Its engine still ticked softly as it cooled, a mechanical heartbeat left behind by an army that never seemed to stop moving. The Luftwaffe mechanics approached carefully, boots sinking into the wet earth, rifles slung low. They had seen American trucks before, but this one was different. The convoy it came from had been strafed by a German fighter patrol, an increasingly rare victory in a war that no longer offered many. "Check if it's still operational," one of them barked. "Don't touch anything explosive." The oldest mechanic among them, Feldwebel Hopfeld-Weibel, climbed onto the running board and peered into the open hood. What he saw made him pause. The six-cylinder engine, compact and neatly organized, wasn't a maze of wires and fittings like the engines he was used to. It was simple, accessible, logical. Every bolt head seemed identical, every component placed as if an invisible hand had thought about the man who would one day repair it under fire. He called over another mechanic. "Look at this, Franz. Even an apprentice could service this thing." The younger man laughed nervously. "That's the point, isn't it? Their soldiers don't need to be mechanics." Hopfeld didn't respond. He reached into the truck's side-mounted toolbox. Inside, he found wrenches and screwdrivers perfectly sized for every visible part. A thick manual lay beneath, printed on clean, high-quality paper. Each page showed crisp, illustrated instructions. No dense paragraphs of jargon, just diagrams, part numbers, arrows. "Everything's labeled," Franz muttered. "They even tell you which tool to use." Hopfeld flipped through the manual silently. The simplicity of it was unsettling. "A child could follow this," he said finally. "A conscript with no experience could open this engine and know exactly what to do." For years, the Germans had prided themselves on precision, on craftsmanship. Every Opel, every Mercedes, every BMW vehicle was a mark of technical superiority. But as the mechanics inspected the captured truck, that pride began to feel like a burden. The GMC wasn't elegant, but it worked. It was built to survive abuse, to keep moving even when everything else around it failed. The soldiers gathered around as the mechanics cranked the engine. The motor coughed once, then roared to life with startling ease. The entire group froze, staring. One of them muttered, "Impossible." "It's been sitting here for hours." Hopfeld listened to the idle, steady, confident. He tapped the fuel line, checked the plugs, and then smiled grimly. No leaks, no irregularities, no nonsense. He straightened and looked at the truck's identification plate, GMC CCKW 353, model year 1943. Below it, a series of production numbers. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands, just like this one. That realization hit harder than any explosion. That night, as the sun blared out over the French horizon, the mechanics sat around a campfire near the captured truck. The supply officer joined them, a man who had once worked at the Opel plant in Brandenburg before the war. He examined the GMC's steel panels and crude wooden cargo bed. "We're looking at this all wrong," he said finally. "This isn't a truck, it's a message." The others frowned, waiting. He gestured to the chassis. "Straight channel steel." Simple welds. Any plant in America can produce this. The cargo bed, standard lumber. The canvas top, civilian-grade fabric. None of this is specialized. That's the brilliance. They can build 1 million of these without slowing down. Hopfeld's jaw tightened. and we can barely build enough for one front." "Exactly," the officer said. "They designed for their strength, industrial scale. We designed for ours, engineering perfection. But perfection doesn't win total wars. Numbers do." A heavy silence followed. The crackle of the fire filled the air as they all stared at the truck glowing softly in the darkness. Over the next days, the German mechanics continued studying their prize. Every new discovery deepened their unease. The transmission housing, cast in one piece. The six-wheel drive system, activated by a single, sturdy lever. The suspension, leaf springs so basic they could be repaired with a hammer. Each finding was a small humiliation, a reminder that the Americans had built a machine not for admiration, but for utility. When they compared it to their own Opel Blitz trucks, the difference was stark. The Blitz, though beautifully engineered, was fragile in practice. Rear-wheel drive only, prone to bogging down in mud, with delicate suspension parts that needed specialized tools. The GMC didn't care about finesse. It just worked. It was heavy, clumsy, even crude, but unstoppable. Hopfeld took notes in his pocketbook. His handwriting grew tighter with each observation. "Every bolt same size," he wrote. "Oil filter removable by hand. No precision tools required. System built for replacement, not repair." Franz pointed at a stamped number on the frame. "Pontiac Plant, Number 1, 1943. Hopfeld frowned. "Pontiac? That's in America, yes." "Detroit, I think," Franz replied. Hopfeld did the math silently. 1 plant, 1 year, thousands, no, hundreds of thousands of these trucks. If one American factory could build that many, how many factories did they have? Dozens, maybe more. The realization was almost nauseating. 2 days later, the supply officer returned with a small notebook filled with estimates. "In 1943, he announced, "we built about 27,000 Opel Blitz trucks. The Americans, at least 10 times that number of GMCS. And they're not the only company. Chevrolet, Dodge, Ford, International, all building trucks to the same standard." Hopfeld exhaled slowly. "Then it's already over," he said softly. "We just haven't admitted it yet." By week's end, the Germans had fully integrated the captured GMC into their unit. They used it for hauling supplies, towing artillery, even transporting wounded. It never faltered. It started every morning, ran every day, and handled mud, rain, and overloading without complaint. Soldiers began to prefer it to their own trucks. "This thing is indestructible," Franz said one night, patting its hood affectionately. Hopfeld gave a short laugh. "No, Franz. It's not indestructible. It's designed for idiots." He paused, then added, "And that's genius." When orders came to withdraw eastward, the captured truck led the convoy. Along a parallel road, they saw what seemed like an endless column of American vehicles. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them, all identical, all moving in perfect rhythm. It wasn't a battle column, it was a supply convoy, and it stretched beyond the horizon. The German soldiers watched in silence. "Where are their horses?" one asked finally. Hopfeld looked at the boy and shook his head. "They don't use horses." Not anymore. That was when it truly sank in. The Americans weren't just fighting with better logistics, they were fighting with an entirely different philosophy, one built on abundance, speed, and standardization. They had mechanized everything. Hopfeld didn't say it out loud, but every man there understood. Germany, for all its skill and craftsmanship, was fighting a war it could never win, not because its soldiers weren't brave enough, but because its factories couldn't keep up. As September rolled into France, the 276th Infantry Division's mechanics had become unwilling students of American engineering. Each mile they drove that captured GMC, each hill it climbed, each muddy track it conquered without complaint, stripped away another layer of German confidence. The Opel Blitz was now a relic, a fine horse in a world of machines bred for endurance. The Luftwaffe men, who once mocked American vehicles as industrial junk, began to whisper about them with something close to awe. Hopfeld kept meticulous notes. He had started as a proud craftsman, trained in the art of precision fitting, in calibrating tolerances to the width of a hair. But now his notepad was filled with words like simplicity, standardization, and speed. Every entry seemed to contradict the very foundation of German engineering philosophy. One rainy evening, under a leaking tarpaulin, he and the supply officer compared figures again. According to the captured documents, the officer said, flipping through pages of intelligence reports, the Americans are producing over 500,000 trucks of this type alone, just this model, this CCKW. We have fewer than 100,000 Blitz trucks total, and most of ours are rear-wheel drive. Hopfeld nodded slowly, staring at the fire. Then every single one of these trucks we destroy means nothing. They replace it before it hits the scrap heap. The officer sighed. They don't build for excellence. They build for multiplication, for replacement, for the long war we never prepared for. That night, when the men turned in, Hopfeld stayed awake by the truck. The rain hissed on the metal hood. He touched the stamped steel like a relic, feeling its rough edges and rivets. Somewhere in Detroit, men and women he'd never met, factory workers, not soldiers, had created this machine by the tens of thousands. And that, he realized, was how wars were now won. By early October, their division's vehicles were running low on fuel. The Opel trucks stalled along the roadside, horses exhausted, wagons bogged down in mud. The captured GMC, meanwhile, kept hauling men and supplies. The other mechanics cannibalized broken Blitz trucks for parts, trying desperately to keep at least a few operational. But Hopfeld's team had no such problem. Their American truck just kept going. When orders came to retreat again, they loaded the GMC far beyond its limit. Ammunition, crates, even men clinging to the sides. Still it moved. Its suspension groaned but held, its engine labored but never failed. A supply sergeant joked bitterly, this truck could probably drag the whole division home. Hopfeld smiled faintly. It might have to. During one of their stops, an exhausted young soldier leaned against the truck's side and asked, Herr Feldwebel, how do they build so many of these? Do they have magic factories? Hopfeld thought for a long moment before answering. No magic, just system, organization. They've turned manufacturing into warfare itself. The boy frowned, not understanding, but Hopfeld didn't explain further. He barely understood it himself, only that the Americans had achieved something deeper than production. They had mechanized their nation's very rhythm. Later that week, another convoy of American supply trucks passed along a parallel road, a sight now familiar, but no less demoralizing. Hundreds of identical vehicles, each carrying food, ammunition, or fuel, each moving with the same confidence, the same rhythm. It wasn't a line of trucks, it was a living artery. Look at that, Franz whispered. Even their logistics have formations. Hopfeld just nodded, too tired to speak. By November, the German retreat had turned chaotic. The 276 supply lines collapsed entirely. Without fuel, most of their remaining trucks were abandoned or stripped for parts. The Americans, however, never seemed to run out. Even as roads crumbled and bridges fell, their supply convoys found new routes, rebuilt crossings, and kept advancing. It was as though their entire army ran on an invisible current of endless machinery. Hopfeld's captured GMC now hauled wounded men through the Ardennes, dodging artillery fire and strafing runs. Every time the truck started, the men cheered like children. "The American never dies," someone joked, patting the fender. It was gallows humor, but it held truth. In December, as preparations for the Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, began, Hopfeld and his team received shocking orders. They were to capture as many American vehicles as possible and use them for transport. The German command had quietly acknowledged what the mechanics already knew. Their own logistics couldn't sustain the attack. The offensive depended on American fuel and American trucks. Hopfeld stared at the order sheet, rain dripping from his helmet. "We're using their machines to fight them," he muttered, and praying they don't notice. The offensive began under a steel-gray sky. Snow fell thick across the Ardennes, muffling everything but the growl of engines. German units surged forward, briefly catching the Allies off guard. But behind every German tank, every infantry column, loomed the same problem: fuel. The supply trucks couldn't keep up. The horses froze. The blitz trucks broke axles on icy slopes. Hopfeld's GMC, though battered, ran flawlessly. When other vehicles stalled, it pulled them free. When gasoline ran low, the mechanics siphoned from abandoned American jeeps. Hopfeld drove through the night, his gloved hands frozen, the windshield fogged. Around him, chaos unfolded. German columns that had advanced triumphantly days before were now stranded in snow, engines dead. Soldiers huddled around burning tires for warmth. By Christmas, the offensive had stalled. Fuel reserves were gone, and American counterattacks slammed into the exhausted Wehrmacht. The 276th was ordered to withdraw. On a narrow road lined with wrecked panzers, Hopfeld's GMC was one of the few vehicles still moving. He looked out over the white landscape dotted with twisted metal and thought, "This is how an empire dies, not in defeat, but in exhaustion." Weeks later, when the order to retreat back to the Rhine came, the GMC's engine still started on the first try. The Opel trucks were gone. The horses, dead or starving. The few that remained were pulling wagons like it was 1914 again. Hopfeld's mechanics followed their truck eastward, the last survivors of a philosophy that had believed precision could overcome production. When they finally reached the Rhine in early March, American air superiority was total. Bridges fell, towns burned, and the sound of Allied engines filled the air day and night. From their foxhole, Hopfeld and his men watched columns of American convoys rolling across captured roads, GMCs, Dodges, Studebakers, thousands of them, all identical, all functioning as one machine. "They've built an army that runs on industry," Franz said quietly. Hopfeld's reply was almost a whisper, "And we built one that runs on pride." He didn't need to say more. The others knew what he meant. Precision had lost to practicality. Perfection had lost to production. When the division finally surrendered in April 1945, Hopfeld's GMC was still running. The Americans took it back with a mixture of surprise and amusement. German prisoners were loaded into the very same trucks that had outlasted their own. Hopfeld climbed aboard, feeling the familiar vibration under his boots. The irony wasn't lost on him. Defeated soldiers carried to captivity by the machines that had won the war. As they rolled toward the prisoner camp, Hopfeld looked at the endless line of identical vehicles stretching ahead. Each truck a testament to an idea Germany had failed to understand, that in modern war, victory belongs not to the best engineer, but to the best manufacturer. At the processing center near Koblenz, the prisoners were herded into rows beside an enormous motor pool. Hundreds of trucks gleamed under the weak spring sun, green, uniform, and meticulously maintained. Hopfeld recognized the familiar GMC silhouettes instantly. It was as if the same machine had multiplied itself endlessly, forming an army of metal clones. American soldiers in clean uniforms moved briskly between the rows, checking oil, refilling fluids, logging mileage. None of them looked like professional mechanics. They were kids, barely out of their teens, yet they worked with an efficiency the Germans couldn't help but admire. Tools were plentiful. Parts boxes lay open. Manuals, identical to the one Hopfeld had found in the captured truck, were spread across hoods, pages marked with grease, but still legible. As the prisoners waited, an American motor sergeant approached, clipboard in hand. He was broad-shouldered, chewing gum, his manner casual but confident. "You guys mechanics?" he asked in heavily accented English, scanning their uniforms. Hopfeld hesitated, then nodded. "Ja, mechanics." The sergeant grinned. "Good. We need mechanics. These trucks don't fix themselves. You want to work? Better than sitting behind barbed wire all day." A few of the Germans exchanged cautious looks. Hopfeld shrugged. "We'll work." Within hours, they were inside the motor pool, sleeves rolled up, wrenches in hand, servicing the same trucks that had crushed their army's logistics. The irony hung thick, but so did the fascination. Hopfeld found himself partnered with the sergeant, who introduced himself simply as Tom. The man was direct but not unkind. He handed Hopfeld a greasy manual. "We design these things for speed. Fast maintenance, common tools, common parts. You break it, you fix it fast. That's how we keep moving." Hopfeld flipped through the pages, nodding. "I see that. Even the spark plug size is same as every truck here." "Exactly," Tom said proudly. "You could take a part off that Studebaker over there, drop it into this GMC, and it'll fit fine. That's the point. Doesn't matter who built it. It all works together." The German frowned slightly. "And you can do complete overhaul in field?" Tom grinned. 8 hours, 2 guys, 1 tool set, engine, transmission, the works. "Try that with your fancy Blitz." Hopfeld laughed softly despite himself. "No, that would take days, and specialized tools, factory work, not field work." "See, that's the difference," Tom said, tightening a bolt. "You Germans make machines that need perfect people. We make machines that work for average people. You lose less time that way." Hopfeld looked at the endless rows of identical trucks and nodded slowly. "Then you designed for war." "We designed for peace." Tom shrugged. "Guess so. But war doesn't care about perfect machines, just working ones." Over the next weeks, the German mechanics became part of the American routine. They learned procedures, memorized part codes, and marveled at how everything fit together. The Americans didn't hoard spare parts. They had warehouses full of them. When something broke, it wasn't repaired delicately, it was replaced instantly. Efficiency over sentiment. Hopfeld began to understand what true mass production meant. At Opel, every vehicle was almost handcrafted, fitted, measured, refined. In Detroit, machines built machines. Human hands guided the process, but the rhythm came from conveyor belts and stamping presses. The philosophy was completely different. Precision through repetition, not individuality. One afternoon, while changing an oil filter, Franz muttered, "They treat trucks like bullets. Use one, discard it, load another." Hopfeld smiled faintly, and that's why they never run out. As weeks turned into months, the Germans began to respect their captors, not just for their victory, but for how casually they carried it. The American soldiers weren't arrogant. They were practical, confident, and always moving forward. To them, these machines were just tools in a vast system that worked because everyone understood their role. By late summer of 1945, rumors of repatriation began spreading through the camp. Germany was in ruins, cities flattened, industry shattered. The prisoners spoke in hushed tones about what awaited them at home. No factories, no work, no fuel. But Hopfeld felt something different stirring inside him, a sense of clarity. He had seen how an industrial system could sustain an army, and how that same system could rebuild a nation. When the Americans finally processed his release, the motor sergeant shook his hand. "You're a damn good mechanic, Hopfeld. Hope you take what you learned here back home." Hopfeld nodded. "I will. You've shown me how to build more than trucks." "Then we did something right," Tom said, smiling. By autumn, the German mechanics returned to their devastated homeland. Bridges lay in rubble, railways twisted like vines, factories nothing but shells. Yet, everywhere they turned, they saw American vehicles, GMCs, Jeeps, Dodges, hauling supplies for reconstruction. The same machines that had once thundered across battlefields were now ferrying food, medicine, and building materials. Hopfeld found work almost immediately in a depot at Frankfurt, maintaining Allied trucks for reconstruction crews. He trained younger Germans, boys who had grown up under bombs and rationing, showing them the simplicity of American designs. "Look here," he'd say, pointing to a GMC carburetor. "No need for special fittings. One wrench fits all." The boys would laugh, fascinated by how something so crude could be so effective. At night, as he sat in the dim depot office, Hopfeld often thought about what the war had really taught him. Before, he had believed that craftsmanship was the highest virtue, that the measure of an engineer was the beauty of his design. Now he knew better. The true measure was adaptability, the ability to build not the best machine, but the right one for the world that existed. By 1947, the Marshall Plan began pumping resources into Germany, and the same GMC trucks Hopfeld had once repaired for an enemy were now hauling lumber and cement for rebuilding his own cities. It was a strange redemption, one forged through humility and hard-earned understanding. Factories reopened: Opel, Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, this time adopting many of the American manufacturing methods: standardized components, interchangeable parts, simplified assembly lines. Engineers spoke of efficiency of process rather than perfection of design. The lessons of defeat were slowly becoming the foundation of a new future. Hopfeld sometimes walked through the rebuilt Opel plant, now a shadow of its former self, but humming again with promise. He would pause beside the stamping presses and smile faintly, hearing the rhythmic thunder of steel panels being shaped. It reminded him of the motor pools in Koblenz, of rows upon rows of identical trucks, each one born from the same philosophy. That quantity, when built with intelligence, had a quality all its own. Germany was learning what America had already mastered, and for Hopfeld, that realization was worth every humiliation he had endured. By 1948, Germany was no longer just recovering, it was evolving. The ruins had become laboratories, the old pride reshaped into pragmatism. Hopfeld Weibel, once the Feldwebel mechanic of a defeated army, now found himself advising engineers half his age. They hung on his every word, eager to understand the lessons he had learned the hard way. "Forget perfection," he told them one afternoon inside the Opel reconstruction plant. "Perfection breaks under pressure. You must design for resilience." He tapped a blueprint on the table. If a part takes too long to make, too long to repair, or too long to replace, it's a bad design. The Americans taught me that without meaning to. The younger men nodded. They had grown up hearing stories of American abundance, of endless convoys, endless trucks, endless fuel. For them, the mythology of the American machine was as real as the rubble outside their windows. But to Hopfeld, it wasn't myth. He had seen it. He had lived inside that system, turned its wrenches, felt its rhythm. During a lunch break, one of the new apprentices asked him, "Do you really think we can build like them, like the Americans?" Hopfeld smiled faintly. "No, and we shouldn't try to be them. We must build better, with their lessons, but in our own way." He leaned forward. "They mastered production. We must master efficiency. They built for millions of drivers. We will build for millions of roads yet to come." It was in those words that a new philosophy of German industry began to take shape, one that married the American obsession with standardization to the German passion for precision. It was no longer about building the most beautiful machine, but the smartest one to manufacture. By the early 1950s, the first fruits of that synthesis began to appear. Volkswagen's Type 1, the Beetle, rolled off the assembly lines in numbers that shocked even American observers. Mercedes-Benz reopened its plants with new assembly strategies, producing durable commercial vehicles in record time. The ghosts of Detroit and Pontiac lingered in every blueprint. When journalists visited the Frankfurt depot where Hopfeld worked, they often found him standing beside a battered GMC truck, its paint faded, its panels dented, but its engine still running perfectly. He refused to part with it. "This truck," he told one interviewer, "taught me more about war and peace than any officer ever did." He had kept the original maintenance manual, now patched and stained. On its cover, written in pencil, were the words, "Built for an army of millions." That phrase became his mantra. In 1954, during a technical conference in Stuttgart,